Joining me now for a long talk about his candidacy, about who he is and who he isn't, is Republican presidential candidate David Duke. Mr. Duke, thanks for coming in at the end of a long day to talk with us here. At your news conference before you appeared on radio station WRHC this afternoon, you said essentially, and I'm paraphrasing of course, that as a young man, 19 years old, 21, that wearing a Nazi uniform and a swastika armband and belonging to the Ku Klux Klan were essentially youthful indiscretions, errors of judgment, and that you've repented, that you've changed, you've moved on. But of course, you know, a lot of people think that you're still the same guy with the same beliefs. You're only using subtler language. What do you say to those people?
Well, I didn't call them youthful indiscretions. I called them youthful mistakes, but they're mistakes of conscience and opinion. I think a lot of us change opinions and ideas we have in our lives as we go along. I have a voting record in the House of Representatives in Louisiana that's very clear for anyone to examine. I voted for equal rights for all. I've worked for welfare reform. I've worked for the principles that most Americans believe in. I've worked for less government, more individual freedom and liberty, and that's what I stand for today.
On the other hand, as late as 1989, and I asked you about this at the news conference, and you took exception to it, so obviously you will again, but as late as 1989, you were selling some books in your office, including Mein Kampf. Why would you be selling Hitler's famous treatise in your office as late as 2 years ago?
No, I didn't sell any books in my office. I did have a bookstore and a book service for 20 years, went all over the country. It was left-wing books, right-wing books, and you could go in any bookstore in Miami and you could get Hitler's Mein Kampf, or you could get Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto. And because you sell books doesn't mean you agree with those opinions.
Well, I guess the question is, if I may interrupt, do you agree with his opinions? Because according to the New Orleans Times-Picayune, as late as 1985, on April 20th, Hitler's birthday, you and some friends would gather and would celebrate, would toast him and celebrate his life.
That's just not true. It has not been corroborated. It's just not true. The truth is, I believe in freedom. I'm opposed to tyranny of any kind. National Socialism was a disaster for European civilization. It's something I am opposed to, just as I'm opposed to international communism. And every chance I've had the opportunity to do so, I voted for less government. I think our government's getting too big and too powerful in this country. Taxes are going up. George Bush promised to cut government and cut taxes. He said, read my lips, but I guess he really meant kiss my hips. We need a real change in the way government's going. And I believe in individual freedom. That's what I stand for and work for. And a lot of us have had things in our past. Clarence Thomas was once associated with the Black Panther Party. He wore a Black Panther beret. He took over universities. But I supported him for the Supreme Court, not because he was a former black racist, because of what he stands for today. Robert Byrd, who was a liberal Democratic leader of the United States Senate. In fact, he led the Democratic Party in the U.S. Senate, and he was a former Klansman. So I think it's a double standard to talk about my past without talking about liberal Democrats and many Republicans like Clarence Thomas.
Well, I guess what makes some people leery about the metamorphosis that David Duke has gone through is some of your past activities. After you left the Ku Klux Klan, you formed something called the National Association for the Advancement of White People, and many people feel that you simply got rid of the sheets, but you were still espousing the same kind of Aryan white supremacist views as the Klan does.
People don't call the NAACP, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, racist. And I don't think if there's an NAACP member or leader on this program, you would call him a racist or a black supremacist. The organization, and clearly in its charter, says that we will have equal rights for all. I am opposed to affirmative action. I am opposed to quota systems. I think the best qualified person, be they white, black, male, or female, should get the job or promotion or scholarship according to their ability, their talents. I am certainly proud of my heritage, but I don't believe in suppressing other people. And I think today, in many ways, white people are becoming second-class citizens in our own nation. We find ourselves discriminated against in college scholarships, in college admissions, in jobs, and promotions. And I think that's got to end, and that we've got to have excellence as our standard in America.
Mr. Duke, in 1990, when you were running for the United States Senate in Louisiana against Bennett Johnston, one of your direct mail pieces that you sent out said, quote, as you know, America is at a dangerous crossroad. If present immigration trends continue as well as rampant growth of the welfare underclass, America will eventually become a third world country rather than the nation founded on the values of our forefathers. Do you still believe that?
Absolutely. And I think this massive immigration we're having right now from Haiti and the immigration we're having right now from around the world, a lot of it illegal, I think is damaging this country. You know, when the Cubans came here from Cuba, they came here and they wanted to work. They wanted to achieve, and they did just that. You know, immigration is fine. fine when the people are taking part in the American dream. That's not going on today. I think immigration is a threat to America, and I don't think it's working out very well for this country today.
Again, at the news conference on Thursday afternoon with Felipe Rivero sitting there by your side, and we'll get to Mr. Rivero in just a minute, but at that news conference, you essentially said that you support further immigration of Cubans to this country from the island because they are, and I don't want to misquote you, but essentially you said because they are Christian and because they can contribute to our society, but you said you don't believe that the Haitians who are at Guantanamo or on the island in Haiti should come here because they would not contribute. Implicitly, you seem to be saying also because they're black. I
think the Cubans that are coming here are really coming here for freedom. I don't think we can take all the people who are poor.
Are not the Haitians?
Not necessarily. I don't think all the people, a lot of people are coming here to get on the welfare system and get on a free ride from the people who work and produce. And especially the people who work and produce here in southern Florida, which is a great many of them are Cuban descent. And I think it's about time we have this country oriented toward people who work, and if people are sick, obviously we should help them. But we cannot take all the people from all the world who want a handout. And I think there are a lot of people who are coming to America right now who know that they can come to the land of plenty, they can get massive welfare, massive benefits, and they're not really taking part in the American dream.
You know, the language, if I may say, that you have just used is part of what infuriates some of your critics who say when he talks about welfare reform and crime that it's code language to talk about blacks. Are you in fact talking about black mothers who get AFTC and black men who commit crimes? Because certainly they aren't the only ones who commit crimes or get aid to families of dependent children.
Of course they're not. And one of my critics said that, well, when you really talk about welfare, most of the welfare recipients in America are white. Well, if that's true, how can my programs be racist? I'm against programs that encourage people to be locked in the cycle of dependency, that allow drugs to flourish in the housing projects, and that actually encourage illegitimacy. You know, we've got to slow that down. We've got to help people become part of the American process, and I think the welfare system has damaged black people and damaged its recipients. It has not encouraged people to work. It's not encouraged people to be productive, and we've got to change that system. We need to require people to work for their welfare checks in America. That gives them dignity. It gets the lazy off the rolls. I think we've got to have programs to encourage them to be responsible, not have children out of wedlock. I think it's about time that we encourage them as well to obey the law and not abuse the welfare system. In other words, why should a welfare recipient be playing the lottery? And yet many of them actually will cash their welfare check and play the lottery. We should change those rules.
Do you think it's the role of the state that provides some of this money to monitor the way they spend their money and to make sure that, I mean, how are you going to see that people who get some kind of welfare do not go in and spend a buck or two playing the lottery?
Well, a buck or two. Many of them spend more than that. I think that the way we can monitor that is simply by not allowing and make it publicly known that welfare recipients cannot collect lottery jackpots. That would be a very good way to do it. Why in the world should my taxpayer money, hard-earned money, or yours, go to someone who's going to take it and use it on the lottery or use it on the abuses they have? I think we've got to change that system. It doesn't teach them responsibility, and it certainly is unfair to people who work and produce in this state and in this country.
Yeah. Mr. Duke, you were invited to Miami by Felipe Rivero, who is a radio commentator here in South Florida, has been for a number of years. Prior to appearing with him on this radio station, WRHC, Mr. Rivero once again repeated that he doesn't believe that the Holocaust ever happened, that it never existed, that this is a slander on the German people. Do you agree with that?
I think there were terrible atrocities in Germany. I think that everyone recognizes that. I don't know what his comments were. I don't know, how that was taken out of context. I have no knowledge of any of that. He invited me to appear in his program, and I went to go on his program. I'm not going to do a background check on anybody. But he seems to be a very fine anti-communist. He wants to liberate Cuba. And we better start being concerned about the Holocausts that are going on right now in the world. Cuba is a communist prison. There have been hundreds of thousands of people who've been imprisoned unjustly, tens of thousands who've been murdered, and we better start to allow people to have freedom today. We're all opposed to Holocaust, so let's make sure we don't have more Holocausts in the world, and that's really been taking place primarily in this world over the last 80 years by communists who've killed probably close to 80 to 100 million people on this planet.
Yeah, I want to get back to Castro in just a minute, but I want to point out that according to the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, as late as 1985, you were bragging in one public speech speech about your association with something called the IHR, the Institute for Historical Review, which also denies the existence of a Holocaust. In fact, do you have ties with the IHR?
The IHR has no official position on any aspect of history. They certainly have revisionist opinions. They certainly have different authors and scientists and historians that offer ideas in different subjects. I don't identify with everything they say. I'm not a member of that association. But
you believe that there was a Holocaust?
I do, yes, and I do believe in freedom of inquiry. And I'm concerned when people can't investigate ideas and issues and hear both sides of all issues.
Mr. Duke, you said this afternoon, Thursday afternoon, I should say, that that if you were elected president, which is very remote, I think you'd even concede, but if you were elected president, you would give Cuban exiles in this country military arms so that they could overthrow Castro. You would not involve United States troops. We tried that at the Bay of Pigs, and it didn't work. Why do you think it would work now?
No, sir, we didn't try it at the Bay of Pigs. We betrayed them. We promised the Cuban exiles and Cuban patriots air support and support in their invasion of Cuba. We set them up.
By American military people.
And we shipped the support there. In fact, we shipped them there. We transported them to Cuba, and then we stabbed them in the back, much like the American fighting man in Vietnam was stabbed in the back. You know, our men were sent into war, into battle, making the ultimate sacrifice for this country by government leaders who would not let us win that war. So I'm just saying that as President of the United States, I would support the Cuban nationalists who want to liberate their country. I think it's important from their point of view and important from America's point of view. Cuba is pointed as a dagger toward all the Americas. It's the source of so much of the Marxist revolution in South and Central America, and I think we need to overthrow Castro, and I think we have a moment to do it now because the communists, certainly, there's been a lot of changes in the Soviet Union. I'm fearful that hardliners could come back into control. While we have the opportunity, let's help the Cubans take back their country.
Yeah, very briefly, Mr. Duke, for the last 12 years, the Cuban exile community in South Florida, which numbers nearly 1 million now, has heard first Ronald Reagan and then George Bush come to town periodically and say, Cuba sí, Castro no. Why do you think you can make some inroads with the Cuban community here that President Reagan and now President Bush have already made?
Well, everything you've said about me so far in this broadcast shows people, I think, that I'm very different. My whole life, I've been willing to stand up and for things sometimes that aren't popular, but at least I've been willing to stand up and do what I think's right. And I've always been that way. I have a record in the legislature. When I said I'd vote against any tax increase, I meant it. My legislative record proves it. I do what I say. And I think people know that about David Duke, and I think they know as president I mean what I say, and I will do what I say, and I will support the Cubans to overthrow Castro, and I'll give a specific promise about that basis. I will say that by the time 1 year of my administration goes by, Cuba will be free again.
All right. Well, this is going to require, among other things, that you get on the ballot March 10th in the state of Florida.
That's true.
And Van Poole, the state GOP chairman, has so far unilaterally said, nope, David Duke is a charlatan. He can't be on the ballot. What are you going to do to get on the election ballot?
Well, if we have to, we'll go into court. We will make an appeal to Republican leaders right now in the state of Florida to be requested to be put in the ballot, as is our right, I think, as an American citizen, as a member of the Republican Party. I received 56% of the Republican vote in Louisiana just this year. That's a vast majority. I have support all over the country. And this is the United States of America. I think the fact that they're trying to keep me off the ballot is symbolic of the fact that we're losing some of our freedoms here and that some of the hierarchy and the backroom politics seems to dominate our political landscape.
Yeah, well, for what it's worth, I agree. I think to the degree that you should be put on the ballot, let the people choose.
Well, I think they're afraid that I'm going to get an awful lot of votes, and well, I think people want to change. However, George Bush is better than Michael Dukakis or any other liberal Democrat I know of.
Yeah. Finally, let me ask you this question. On Thursday afternoon, I spoke to Miami Mayor Xavier Suarez. He said, I'm not thrilled that David Duke is in town. I spoke to the chairperson of the Dade County Republican Committee. She said your visit was, quote, regretful, and the chairman of the Dade legislative delegation, a state senator named Lincoln Diaz-Balart, denounced you in rather strong terms. Osvaldo Soto, the head of something called the Spanish-American League Against Discrimination, denounced you, the head of the NAACP. There are a lot of people who aren't happy that you're in town. Well, who does support you?
Let me tell you something. A lot of people in the Soviet Union were saying the same things about Boris Yeltsin. Just a couple of years ago.
You are the Boris Yeltsin of presidential politics?
I'm not saying that I am, but what I'm saying is just because a few members of the hierarchy don't like me, I know the average Republican, the rank-and-file Republican, who turns the wheels of the Republican Party and turns the wheels of America, believes in what I'm doing and what I'm saying, and they waited a long time for someone to stand up openly and honestly about these issues. George Bush should not have signed the quota bill, should not have signed the bill that calls for racial discrimination against the American majority. George Bush should not raise taxes. He should lower government. And I believe what I say, and I'm going to do what I say and stand up for the people in this country who have not had a voice.
David Duke, interesting talking with you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.